Ruben, you are ready to go.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Future You Forum. Today, the topic is neoliberalism and public higher education with an emphasis on Gen AI and academic integrity in higher education. I want to welcome those of you who are on YouTube and certainly want to stress that this is a very, very important topic. With me is my colleague, Frank Fear. We are both Professor Emeriti at Michigan State University. We're both sociologists. We started working together on this following a conference that was held at MSU back in almost really 10 years ago in 2015 at the end of March. And so this forum stems from that conference, which was titled Neoliberalism in Public Higher Education. Following that, we had a special issue of the Social Science Journal, which came out in 2021. A special issue was titled Neoliberalism in Higher Education. So, Frank, we're going to have to talk about how we're going to celebrate our 10th year anniversary, but we'll get to that. Making a brief set of comments here as we get started. Everyone knows that AI is not new. It's been around for quite a while. I believe it was Herbert Simon, a economist, sociologist, who, with some colleagues, designed what came to be known as logic theorist to mimic human thought processes. What is new today, though, is that its use is becoming widespread in industry, and certainly with regard to our interest, widespread in higher education and other sectors of the public arena. But for us, it's especially used by college students and certainly some of our colleagues, right? In education, AI technologies are becoming commonplace, with many schools and universities actually developing and expanding their infrastructures, their related infrastructures, including robotics and so on. And we have lots of questions about the use of AI by students. Some of these issues have to do, or questions have to do with issues of ethics, issues of plagiarism, concerns about cognitive development among our students. All of these are important, as well as how do you evaluate the work of students using AI. So evaluation is also a critical component. To address some of these issues today, we have two people who actually do most of their work, professional work, in this arena. I want to start out by introducing our first speaker. That's Dr. Ulises Mejia, who is a professor of communication at SUNY Oswego Communication Studies. Is the recipient of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship and a Fulbright Specialist from 2021 to 2025. He's the co-founder of the Non-Aligned Technologies Movement and the network Tierra Común, and serves on the board of directors of Humanities New York, a national endowment for the Humanities Initiative. His work has been cited thousands of times. In his most recent book is Data Grab, The New Colonialism of Big Tech and How to Fight Back, came out in 2024, which he co-authored with Nick Coldry. He also has published previously with Nick, and their book, the previous book was The Costs of Connection, How Data is Colonizing Human Life and Appropriating It for Capitalism. So welcome aboard, Ulises. Great to have you. Also with us today is Zachary Kaiser. He is a colleague here at MSU, and he is an artist, teacher, theorist, music producer, and DJ. He is currently Associate Professor of Graphic Design and Experience Architecture at Michigan State University. In his work, he takes up the mantle of the artist as experimenter, critiquing graphic design's participation in the distribution of the sensible a la Rancière. That is, how graphic design and user experience design allow us to perceive some things while concealing others, and thereby shaping our modes of political participation. In his creative work, Zach seeks to render the invisible visible, illuminating the politics of design and technology, as well as the ideas about the future embedded within our technologies themselves. Prior to joining the faculty at Michigan State, he co-founded Skeptic, a Boston-based research and design collective, and serves as a visiting lecturer in various design programs in Boston. He is the author of Interfaces and Us, User Experience Design and the Making of the Computable Subject. There's a concept for you, the computable subject. His work has been featured in national and international exhibitions, and his writing appears in both scholarly and popular publications. Zach regularly exhibits and lectures in the United States and internationally. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll turn first to our colleague, Ulises Mejia. So we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you, Frank and Ruben, for this invitation. It's an honor also to share this space with Zach. And so I'm looking forward to this exchange of ideas. I think the format that we have planned is I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, just share some slides, and then Zach will do the same. We will then respond to each other, but hopefully also incorporate other questions and comments from the audience. So I should also mention that both Zach and I have published pieces on the Future U website, so hopefully you can head over there and take a look if you haven't already. Mine is just a short piece, kind of like an open editorial. Zach has published a very interesting essay, so hopefully you'll get a chance to take a look at those. With that, let me just share my screen and go over just some basic points I want to make here. I will not be revising my op-ed. I'm just looking to add a little bit more context. And I thought I would start with my campus's AI vision statement. And statements like this, I'm assuming a lot of us have seen pop up on our campuses. They are becoming routine. Obviously, campuses have an interest in putting forth policies or strategies in terms of how we're going to integrate AI. I do want to make also very clear that I'm not here attacking my colleagues. I have a lot of respect for the people who have worked on these statements and the policies. I see my relationship with them as one of collaboration, and we challenge each other. So we are in the middle of having discussions about all of these things. But yes, you can see behind this vision statement sort of some of the concerns and opportunities and challenges that campuses are facing when it comes to putting forward a vision of how we're going to integrate AI. And of course, there's the necessary language about diversity and equity and inclusion and privacy. We'll see how long words like that remain in statements under the current administration. As you know, funding, as we have seen, becomes precarious. The availability of funding becomes precarious when we start using words like that. So let's see. Anyway, that's our statement. I do want to share also with you some actual data. So I conducted a short survey in my classes to just an anonymous survey to see how students are using AI in my courses. I actually, a year ago, which seems like a long time ago, I had a policy, a syllabus policy, and I'm sure Zach is going to talk more about that, that sought to integrate AI. It went very badly, and so actually this last semester I decided no AI. But I know that students are using AI anyway. And so this survey was an anonymous survey intended to sort of get their opinions or get a sense of how they're actually using it. Of course, of my 35 students, no student said, yes, I'm just copying and pasting whatever AI gives me. Some of them said they're taking that text and editing it a little, but of course, the vast majority of them said they're taking what AI gives them and editing it a lot. I'm not sure if that's accurate or if that's aspirational. That's how they would like to think they're using AI. But anyway, it is what it is. And the other question I thought was kind of interesting is I wanted to know the reasons why they are using AI. And here I allow them to check all that apply. But this is kind of interesting because some of them don't think of themselves as good writers, but the vast majority, actually, the two main reasons why they said that they're using AI is because they need to save time. There's too much schoolwork. So this allows them to save some time. And the other reason is because it's easy. It's just there, it's easy. So why not use it? Now, my campus also conducted a study, and this is a much larger study with about 500 students. And so I just want to share some of the key findings. I'm not going to share the data because actually my institutional research and assessment office wanted me to include this statement to be very clear that this is not supposed to be data used to generate generalizable knowledge. This was just kind of like an opinion survey. And so I do want to acknowledge them and thank them for allowing me to use some of this. But while not presenting the data, I did want to present sort of their surprises and takeaways, which I thought were kind of interesting. Many students are deeply suspicious and skeptical about AI. About half of the ones who were polled are actually skeptical, which I think sort of mirrors what society in general feels. I believe, according to a Pew Research study, about half of the US population had more concerns than hopes about AI. Students wanted a clear campus policy on AI. So that's interesting that they're looking to us to sort of tell them, how we're going to be integrating these technologies. They do understand how AI works. And maybe they're starting to use it more in more sophisticated ways instead of just asking it to write the whole essay. Maybe they're using it to brainstorm, to come up with ideas and so on. Okay, so based on all of this information, I actually prepared a memo that I shared with the AI group on my campus, with the deans, with the provost, with the president. So I just want to summarize the 7 main points that I identify as concern areas in my memo. The first one, and perhaps most important, is this misalignment I see of Gen AI with academic integrity. And this is where I can directly reference my op-ed that I published in Future You, because in my opinion, Gen AI violates basic principles of academic integrity. This is not just about the cheating crisis, but it's about us as an academic community endorsing the use of a technology that we already know that has been proven to be intentionally built using deceptive plagiarism and copyright violations. So we cannot be a community that believes in academic integrity in citations, and then endorse the use of this tool that violates those principles. So that's the first point. The second point is that yes, there's plenty of ongoing concerns about accuracy, about bias, and about the impact of Gen AI on critical thinking. I realize you cannot click on these links on these slides, but I'm happy to share this memo with you so you can have access to the resources I am citing. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with some of them, which show that Gen AI is inaccurate. It shows certain biases, including racism. And equally importantly, there's this interesting study, and I think we're going to start to see more and more of these kinds of studies that show that AI tool usage is related to a diminished critical thinking skills. So that's obviously a concern. There are labor issues concerns that I'm pointing out to my colleagues on my campus. We are supposedly here to help students find jobs, and so again, Gen AI is a tool that might be reducing employment opportunities. So how do we justify that? There's the environmental impact, which again, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with some of this data. GenAI can use up to 10 times more energy than just doing a standard search query. So again, most campuses claim to be working towards sustainability goals. How do we justify this? Then there are all of the privacy and transparency issues. Do we have an obligation to tell students that the systems that we use are capturing data and maybe using it to train their own AI systems? I know we're using Zoom right now. We're using all sorts of Google products to teach. All of those are capturing data and using it to train AI models. And yes, students click a little box when they enroll and decide to come to our campus that says you can do with my data whatever you want, and third parties can do whatever they want with my data. Does that really constitute consent? Do we need to rethink how students and faculty and staff issue that consent, and can they actually withdraw that consent at some point? We're all about informed consent, right, in our communities, in our research practices. So why doesn't this apply there? Yes, funding is a big issue. Campuses are spending a lot of money on anything that has the word AI on the title, but do we need to also be funding those who are interested in researching the negative impacts of AI? And lastly, do we need to, like I said in my point about privacy, do we need to make that opt-out button more available so that faculty, so that students can opt out? Do we need to provide opportunities for faculty to teach AI-free courses and identify them as such? If we are expecting students not to use AI in their work, should we also not say we're not going to use AI in producing content for our courses, in grading materials, so on and so forth. So anyway, this is just a very short summary of some of the current concerns that I have, and I will now hand it over to Zach to share his thoughts. Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful. I love that memo. I definitely want a copy of that. It's like so good. Um, it's really, really exciting. Thanks, Ulysses, for sharing. Okay, I have some slides that I will share. Yeah, so let's do it. Okay. As Ruben mentioned, I'm Zach. I teach graphic design and UX, user experience design, whatever you want to call it, at Michigan State. I was going to say here at Michigan State, but I'm sitting in my house in Ann Arbor and we're on the internet. So here we are. I just want to say again, thanks to Ruben and Frank for hosting this and continuing to do the good work that you guys do. It's so important. And I was fortunate to be able to experience some of the in-person faculty forums that you all hosted and presented those over the years. I think my first attendance at one of your programs was back in like, I don't know, 2016 maybe or something like that. It was just terrific. So anyway, glad to be a part of this for so long and happy to celebrate the nearly 10th anniversary of it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about student use of AI and from a slightly different angle, which is thinking about how AI comes to be seen as useful in the first place. The background picture here is an etching depicting Lady Ludd, who is one of the purported, though fictional, leaders of the Luddites. Now, many Luddites, when engaged in their brave acts of machine breaking, dressed in women's clothing in order to not be easily identified by their employers whose machines they were attacking. And we'll get back to the Luddites, our friends of the early 1800s in the West Riding of Yorkshire, later. This is a somewhat condensed version of what I've written in my recent op-ed for future use, so I'm both regretful that I don't have new material to share, but also I suppose redundancy isn't inherently a problem when so many of us are overwhelmed and stressed out that folks who join us here will probably not read my writing on the site, and that's totally fine. You know, we all have a lot going on. when I began talking to the guys about this forum, I thought I would go find some good data on the type and frequency of use of generative AI by college students. But I will say that the data that Ulysses has is far better than anything I was able to find on Google, um, because methodologically questionable studies abound. One such study conducted by Chegg, whose ethical scruples are dubious at best, suggests that 80% of university students have used generative AI. And of those students who have used it to quote unquote support their university studies, 56% say they input a question once a day or more. Of the 203 students from the US who report using generative AI, 42% of them said that it frees up more of their time, and 55% said that it helps them learn faster. Now, in Chegg's final report, the layout is telling because directly next to these statistics is a set of survey data about mental health challenges faced as a student in higher education. The rhetorical device of this layout could not be more obvious. Generative AI will free up your time so that you no longer will be one of the 46% of respondents who is experiencing academic burnout. And guess what? Chegg has a solution for you. But forget about Chegg. My own understanding of the frequency and range of student use of generative AI is, first of all, limited by the disciplines within which I teach, so graphic design and user experience design. And also, I haven't taken any informal surveys, but I have some anecdotal evidence. And my sense is that some students are treating something like ChatGPT kind of like a search engine, where they input a question to which they could have otherwise probably found a better, more sophisticated answer on their own and been less energy intensive in the process. Other students use generative AI to help them come up with ideas for projects or to put together an overview of the literature on a given topic. I've noticed comparably fewer students using generative AI to produce imagery for their projects, although that may change in the coming semesters. On the whole, my sense is that the majority of my students are using it, and the perceived utility of its use derives mainly from their perception that it's saving them time. So what's my role as a faculty member in facilitating, prohibiting, or regulating that use? And I think this is where we have to talk about design education because that sort of informs my thinking on this. So I teach graphic design and user experience design, and I'm fortunate to have opportunities to engage with students in ways that are totally different than a lot of other parts of university education. So I'm with no more than 20 students for roughly 3 hours per class period, 2 days a week. We get to know each other pretty well, and because studio-based design education is centered on students doing work during class and giving each other feedback during class, we end up just having like a lot of informal conversations about other stuff. It sort of mirrors almost like an expanded kind of seminar class approach. So one day on a whim, I asked my students if their professors have AI policies in their syllabi. Then at first my students responded with nods. Then I asked a few follow-up questions. Did any professors have AI policies that barred the use of AI entirely? Some students said yes. And I asked if the students thought that was practical of the professor and if that policy is reasonable to enforce. And they said probably not, given the sort of generative AI plagiarism detection arms race. It's kind of difficult to see how that would work. And then I asked them if any of the syllabi that contained AI policies described the underlying rationales for those policies and what research supported those rationales. The students said no. I personally have struggled to arrive at what I feel are satisfactory answers to some basic questions about student use of AI and the kind of policies that should govern that use. So, what should be in such a policy? What are its parameters? What are we in any discipline obligated to teach students about AI? And what are they obligated to know about it? And how does this differ, perhaps, from what they need to know about a pencil when they use it or a computer? On what measure is AI a tool? And what should we and our students of all disciplines know about the tools we use? And how should an AI policy reflect the material circumstances to which our students are subject? So, like the son of a law professor that I am, let's do a hypothetical. So everybody close your eyes and I'm going to tell you a story. Let's say you're teaching a class on utopian literature that counts for a university writing requirement. And let's say you're an adjunct. You're cobbling together jobs, or maybe you're one of the lucky few to be on the tenure track, and you're saddled with service obligations as the department shrinks its staff support, and your dean, who is paid handsomely, says the department just can't afford it. Either way, you're under immense pressure. Financial pressure to keep from having to live out of your car, as in the case of many adjuncts today, or a wildly unrealistic pressure to publish more and faster than anyone who has ever worked in your department before you, as is the case for many tenure-track faculty. Meanwhile, your university is staring down the barrel of decreasing state appropriations, the exodus of federal funding from every aspect of its research portfolio, and ongoing administrative bloat. More students and more tuition dollars seem to be the only thing that can quell the bleeding, and that just requires you and your colleagues to teach bigger classes with more students more often. Even to the most sensitive and self-aware educator and scholar, in times like this, AI might look pretty helpful. It could write assignments for you, it could help with grading, it could write a lit review. It could save you precious time to make your commute to one of the 4 schools at which you adjunct, or it could save you time on your next journal article submission, which you always feel like needed to happen yesterday. Meanwhile, you might have a student in your class who commutes, say, from Detroit to East Lansing. They provide some childcare at home, they work multiple jobs to pay their way through school. The promise of the convenience-enhancing and time-saving capabilities of AI is equally attractive to this student as it is to you as an exhausted adjunct or stressed-out junior faculty member. That student might use ChatGPT to help them come up with ideas for class projects, to give them suggestions for journal articles, or yes, write an entire paper if and when they deem necessary. They are like the game theoretic simulations of humans on which most of our computing today is built, constantly making cost-benefit analyses about every aspect of their everyday lives, trying to figure out a way to win a game that is rigged against them. In other words, you and your students are in the very same boat, and it is sinking fast. Both faculty and students occupy this sinking boat, and the way we're encouraged to perceive our way out of the inevitable catastrophe is through what Ulrich Beck called biographical solutions to systemic contradictions. This produces what is effectively intra-class antagonism, in which people who should be working in solidarity with one another perceive themselves to be instead in competition. We become distracted from the stakes of this antagonism, believing instead that it is rational to use technologies like AI to save time or get a leg up. And this is not a false consciousness that can somehow be discarded at will. It is instead a material reality that makes demands that are nearly impossible to ignore. Under a regime of computationally driven optimization, such as the kind to which both faculty and students are subject, the urge to save time by using generative AI is almost impossible to resist. Stuart Hall told us this so many years ago when in 1983 he said, "Indeed, I have always undertaken to assume that all ideologies which have ever organized men and women organically have something true about them." But the real benefits of the use of generative AI tools do not accrue to the working class, including ourselves and our students. Instead, those benefits accrue primarily to the capitalist class. The international working class, especially folks in the global south mining minerals that are used in the batteries and capacitors, who work in refineries that turn those minerals into useful metals for electronics, or those who work on the massive cargo ships that traverse the oceans, taking these metals from one part of the production process to the next as part of our distributed, globalized network that forms the very infrastructure that makes AI possible, they don't benefit from our use of AI. Any benefits that we or our students derive from using generative AI pale in comparison to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of fewer and fewer people that our increasing reliance on AI facilitates. I try to talk to students pretty explicitly about their salaries that they might earn when they leave school, if they can get a job, relative to the salaries of the people who make and who own the infrastructure that they use to do the work that they do every day. So my students might aspire to be, for example, a junior art director. Maybe they want to move to New York, work at a big ad agency. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics says that their median salary will be $106,500. Now, you can't even step foot in Brooklyn with that salary. Meanwhile, people who actually build the electronics that comprise the infrastructure for the students to do that work once they leave school might make below $3 an hour. And yet, the chair and chief executive officer of Adobe, who makes all of the software that my students will use and that they do use at school, but also that they will use upon graduation, makes $44.9 million. I asked the students to tell me how that makes sense, and it doesn't. So, our shared experience, the sinking of our collective ship, and the way AI becomes seen by both faculty and students as a way out of that ship, even as it actually accelerates the rate of its sinking, is, at least from what I've seen, absent from classroom communication around AI, as well as from the broader discourse on AI in higher education. However, I have an addendum. which is that last year I met a graduate student in engineering who's using machine learning and AI to help mitigate vision loss for folks who are losing their sight and to help individuals who have certain types of paralysis move their limbs. He was frustrated by my seemingly anti-AI stance because, as he saw it, the capitalist exploitation required to create the technologies with which he was working was worth the possibility of transforming someone's life for the better. I offered some pushback, asking if the folks in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who mine the coltan, which is then refined to become tantalum that's used to create the capacitors that keep servers from overheating, will also eventually benefit from that technology. I would argue probably not. But my pushback was misguided. Helping people see or regain use of their limbs is wonderful, and this is something about which we can all agree. And this idea of agreement is essential. If we as a society were able to democratically determine the priorities for technological innovation, helping people see or walk would probably be near the top of that list. But would we be able to agree that it's also important to maybe not boil freshwater organisms to death when waters return to a stream after being used to cool a server? Or perhaps more importantly, equitably remunerating the members of the international working class who do the labor that enables advanced computing to exist in the first place? In his 1973 book, Tools for Conviviality, Ivan Illich writes that the design criteria for all tools should be democratically determined. Illich understands tools in a very broad sense. Tools are for him anything that enables people to act upon their world in intentional ways, ranging from highway systems to medical devices. Today, technological innovation under capitalism is fundamentally anti-democratic. It serves to augment surplus value for the capitalist class. But under different political economic circumstances, perhaps some variation of advanced computing could exist, the design criteria for which would account for its impact on labor and the environment, and the functionality of which could be prioritized by the very people impacted by its development and use. I have an addendum to my addendum, which is that before such a project, one of radical small d democracy, can be undertaken, it may be the case that members of the working class need to rise up in a manner similar to the Luddites. You see, the Luddites have been painted by the brush of history as completely anti-technology, but that brush of history is controlled by the hand of a capitalist. The Luddites were not anti-technology at all. In fact, they probably had a more sophisticated understanding of the technologies of the early 1800s than the capitalists who wanted to replace them with those very technologies. The Luddites instead were selective in their application of machine breaking. They sought to destroy technologies that undermined their craft, exploited and endangered their comrades, and augmented surplus value for the capitalist class without enabling those who lost their jobs to share in the supposed wealth creation. Without a renewed Luddism, one connected today with a militant labor internationalism and that leads to the democratic determination of all technological innovation, any appeals to ethical or effective use of AI in the classroom and beyond are naive at best. I have an addendum to my addendum to my addendum, which is in another informal classroom conversation, my students expressed their surprise at their own unwillingness to work against injustice when that work requires risk-taking, especially the kind of risk-taking that would keep them from their studies or keep them from landing that full-time industry job, even if those jobs continue to be less and less common. Like we discussed earlier, the material circumstances to which students are subject today reinforce the computer simulation model of people, constantly making cost-benefit analyses to yield outcomes that have the highest benefit with the lowest cost. These historical material circumstances are different than those experienced by those fabric industry workers in the West Riding of Yorkshire in the early 1800s. So what began as me being asked to write about student use of AI turned into my own attempt to write an AI policy for my classes, and honestly, my AI policy still sucks. Thanks, guys, for putting up with me. I'll stop sharing my screen, and let's have a discussion.
Thank you both for those excellent and insightful presentations. I learned a lot and looking forward to our discussion. But at this time, I'd like to invite my colleague Frank Fear to make some comments, and then we can continue with the discussion. Frank?
Well, thank you very much, guys. That was great. You know, if Vice President Vance is watching this video, his response will be higher education is a threat to society, as he said before, because what you've done is exactly what we would hope higher education and academicians would do. As it applies to this particular subject, is we all know the what. And the prevailing opinion in society is that when something new comes out, the what, you're encouraged to use it, which can lead obviously to mindlessness. And what you're doing is moving beyond the next stage of, well, how do we do it, to raising questions that relate to the fundamental matter of ethics. Ought we, should we do it? And I was thinking about this, Zach, as you talked about the Luddites, then that is an example of mindfulness. Rather than adopting something across the board, you're selective in relationship to values, perspectives, values, beliefs that are fundamental to the way you view the world, your epistemology, ontology. And that is getting diminished these days. And that's why higher education is a threat, I can see. Story, and then I'll stop. I do a lot in retirement. I do a lot of editing, actually as much editing, even more so than writing, although I do both. And a couple of days, and one of the things that I do, I picked up the baton from a colleague who had this great idea. I think it's a great idea in the sports domain of essentially starting a website, a blog that enabled everyday fans to write full-length articles versus responding to articles that other people write. In other words, the response on Facebook or on Twitter, or comments that might be made on any website, sports website. But we also know when you do that, you're opening up an opportunity for people who are not necessarily expert at writing, and in most cases they're not, or even write a lot. That may not be their preferred way of expressing themselves. And so I picked up the baton when he went on to another job. And so I've been managing editor of this for, I think, 12 years now. So over that time, probably about 5,000 to 6,000 articles. And I received one the other day that was the most interesting of all of those articles. And it was from a person that I did not recognize the name. And as I put it through my technology to find out if this in fact was written by him, about 2/3 of it was not. It was either directly taken and cited other people's work without attribution, or was written by AI for him. And so I responded to him, and his response was, and this relates to something, Ulysses, that you brought up in terms of taking jobs away. This is the flip side of that. He said, I do this to generate money. So what he does is he creates these articles in volume and then sells them. And my response to him was, writing is a craft. It's not a download. And I said, let's do this. I will publish that piece but at the bottom of it, I will have a statement that 2/3 of this article was not written directly by the author. I had received probably 5 or 6 emails from him before that. As you might expect, I was ghosted at that point. And so one of the things, and I'll stop with this, that I think to ratchet it up a level, your work, both of you, is extremely important, because this is exactly the kind of approach we would want and hope from thoughtful academicians, or not that some academicians are not, but you're being very thoughtful, and it's an antidote to mindlessness. It's an example of mindfulness. And I was having a conversation with a colleague who's going to be doing a forum for us next week. And he said, I asked him, what is one of the things that really bothers you about where society is trending? And he said, the primary unit of analysis in so many of these things is the individual. It's not the institution. And if you think about your opening presentations, it's all about what should we be doing as a collective, not just me as a faculty member, but what should our institutional obligation should be, and what should the institution's obligations as articulated at that level be? And we've lost that rather significantly. Focus too much on technology is good, and going back, Zach, to your citation, Ulrich Beck, in his 1992 book, The Risk Society, yes, when you think of all the great things that technology has done for us, let's not forget there is extreme risk. There is a thing called environmental injustice, even though it wasn't coined back then. At least I don't think it was. But the fact of the matter is that you're getting beyond the what, you're blasting beyond the how, and asking fundamental questions about why, including ought we. And I congratulate you for that.
Wow,
Thank you
thanks,
very much,
Frank.
Frank. Does either one of you want to respond either to Frank or make additional comments? Ulises?
Sure, I'll get started. I mean, lots of good stuff here. I've been taking notes and trying to decide where to even begin. Just to pick up on your anecdote, Frank, because it's true that some people, including some of our students, do see this as a productivity tool, as something that will allow them to, do more with less and earn more money. I think there's very much also the idea at our institutions that we need to teach students how to be smart about using these tools because this will be their professional reality. And there's a lot of lip service being paid to this notion of AI as a co-pilot. We will all need to learn how to do this because the jobs of the future or of the present, if you want to think about it, are jobs where AI is next to us, helping us be more efficient, more productive. Of course, what's usually missing from that formulation is that, yes, AI is a good co pilot in those cases where jobs have already been reduced, where your team has been cut by half. And so then instead of having a team of 5 people doing a particular task, you will have a team of 2 people doing that job, being paid the same amount of money. But then in those situations, yes, AI will be a necessary co-pilot because we won't have time to do everything that we're supposed to do. So I think the labor issues are crucial here. I think when I talk to my students, I make sure that they understand. Yes, it's a productivity tool. The subtext is you will need to be more productive because there will be fewer jobs around. They will be more competitive. So you will be asked to do more with less. So I want to see what Zach has to say about that. But the other point I want to also, I was thinking about during his presentation and Frank's comment as well, is this whole cheating crisis, which I think we didn't really address, right? Because that's how most of our colleagues are sort of interested in confronting this issue, that there is a cheating crisis going on. And in my op-ed, I do talk a little bit about sort of the changing social relations, how in the space of a year or two, my relations with my students have completely changed in the sense that it's not fair to them, but unfortunately, I can no longer tell if the work is their own. I think we're all starting from this starting point of suspicion. It's like, did they use AI to complete this assignment? And just like Frank was able to tell, with this submitted piece that was clearly generated by AI, AI generated content is usually pretty bad. We can detect it. There are detectors out there, but the detectors are not perfect. I spent last semester a lot of time playing that role of a detective. It's like, I think this is generated with AI. So now I need to spend a lot of time looking at the document history, sending emails. Students take umbrage, they're upset. How dare I accuse them of plagiarism and cheating? Of course, in some cases, it turns out that they did, in fact, plagiarize and cheat. And so then they need to be reported to the dean. It's just a mess. And in the middle of all of this, I think we need to acknowledge that social relations are fundamentally changing, that trust relationship between students and teachers is fundamentally changing. And we have a bunch of big tech companies to blame for that, for pushing down our throats a technology that basically nobody wanted. Zach, over to you.
Oh, beautifully put, man. Um, something that I don't know if uh, Frank is going to bring this up, but something that came up in the chat or the questions in YouTube that I want to just surface here is related to some of my comments on like autonomy in community-based decision making about technologies to which we're subject and to which we're not subject. And that is a question about like when we what does it mean to help people see or walk again? And why is it so difficult for folks who are unable to see or unable to walk to navigate the world? So instead of focusing on the body as a locus of fixture, why not focus on the system or the world as the locus of that fixture? And I think that that's like an important piece of the puzzle, which is that when I talk about, when I mentioned this engineering student, I think, there's an ideological dimension to even using AI to do something that is purportedly and to me, quite honestly, like relatively benevolent, that ignores the inequities baked into the built environment or into our society as such. And so I think like, to me, people should be able to also decide or have some democratic decision-making power when it comes to thinking about those kinds of solutions. What does it mean to restore someone's sight? Does it mean to make a world that is seeable through other means? And I think that, it'd be nice to be able to consider some of those things too. But also, Ulysses, I just wanted to mention I loved that in that survey that you said there were like roughly, half of students were like skeptical of. I mean, to me, that's really heartening. It's like I feel like there's this double consciousness happening where it's like there's a comfort with using AI, generative AI, in part because it saves time, but there's also this part of, like in the back of students' mind, like we have to give them more credit, right? Like to me, it's always about like, the systemic, the situation in which students find themselves that drives a lot of decision making and it drives our decision making too. I had a colleague text me the other day, like, look, if AI is gonna like help me with like meal prep for my family, like I'm busy, I'm stressed out, like I might need to use it. Like we have circumstances to which we're subject, and I want to, like you were saying at the beginning, I want to express respect for people experiencing those circumstances and not necessarily blame them for all the decisions they make in response to those circumstances. So it was cool to hear that like students are kind of, they're skeptical. And I think that there's a undercurrent of understanding there. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think many students are skeptical. Many students are starting to ask questions. Um, and, I also see it. Obviously, I've been teaching about these issues for some years, maybe not directly having to do with AI, but even just having to do with data collection and privacy. And it's true that 10, 15 years ago, the standard response from students was, I don't care if corporations are collecting my data and tracking me because I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not a terrorist. And so who cares? In exchange for that, I'm getting access to all of these free tools. And so it's a good bargain. Interestingly and anecdotally, I haven't done any serious research on this, but I think that response has been changing with the years. And when I ask that question in class, yes, some students still do say that they don't care, but it's starting to change. I would say more and more students are saying, I have a problem with that. This is not right. How is this working? Did I even consent? Why can't I withdraw my consent to collect all of this data? And I don't mean to generalize, but it's also interesting to see the kind of students who say, I don't have a problem. Let's just say that those tend to be students who enjoy certain privileges in society through their class, race, or gender. And the students who are having problems come from the opposite demographics. And so then that's a very interesting moment in class because then we can have a dialogue. and then students question each other and say, well, wait a minute, this might be okay with you, but I, as a member of this minority group, call it one thing, I'm being tracked, and so that surveillance can be used for very different purposes. So then that's why I have an issue with it. The other thing I just wanted to quickly respond is also, Zach, I've been there. When I start talking about those things, students, faculty say, well, AI is great. It's helping us solve cancer. It's helping people walk. It's doing all of these great things. I do want to make a very clear distinction. I think these days we throw a lot of things into this big bucket called AI. Not all of those things are AI. I'm all for machine learning in helping computers be more effective at detecting cancer growth. Or, there's just some impressive research being done, including, I think I was reading recently, a machine learning model that can detect Alzheimer's from voice recordings, like way before they happen. It's like, who doesn't want that? But that's not the same as Gen AI. That's not the same as generative AI tools like ChatGPT and DeepSeek and Llama and all of those that basically, they are taking over creative tasks, writing, image generation, music generation, with the goal of replacing humans. So I make a very clear distinction. I'm not against machine learning. I think it should be applied in medicine. Yes, it should not be applied for military purposes, and we're seeing a lot of that too, unfortunately. But I make a distinction between those uses and Gen AI that basically is taking away jobs and contributing to the degradation of our climate.
Thank you very much for that, Ulises. I want to sort of turn to some of the issues that have been raised. First of all, I want to say that I've never intentionally used AI, uh, mainly because when I use Word, it tries to correct my writing, and when I go back and I say, no, this is how I want to say it. And so when you introduce the notion of bias and inequities and so on, there's a whole host of issues that can be brought up there. But I want to go, I have several questions and I don't want to present them all. I want to continue the discussion, but I did learn from someone not too long ago that students have created Luddite organizations. I don't know if either one of you have learned about that and can speak to that. Ulises, you seem to have a little familiarity.
A little. I've heard of groups of young people who have, for instance, abandoned their smartphones and gone back to flip phones, and they call themselves Luddites.
Mhm.
And as far as older Luddites, I think currently I'm part of at least two groups who call themselves or identify themselves with, Luddite ways of thinking. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think this one that was mentioned to me was specifically against AI. So, and I don't know if it was high school or if it was college, but apparently some of this, and I was is happening, and I was delighted to learn of it that they are being critical about its use and so on. But let's turn a little bit, and also in terms of saving time. Um, it also, in some ways, raises questions about what we consider and our colleagues consider rigor, because in many instances, what we do is we overload students with readings, writings, projects, and so forth, and fail to really effectively assess critical thinking and some of the other aspects. So, if you get all this other work done, then you pass the course. But, that's a different kind of way of measuring growth, which essentially what we should be measuring is not just the assimilation of the stock of information, but also the cognitive growth that has taken place. But I want to turn also to the broader implications of AI and the issues of bias and so forth. But and relating it to a moral society, I mean, it just seems that our society, uh, anything goes. You can lie and it's fine. You can commit crimes and it's fine. You can do this and you do that and it's fine. And AI can assist in committing a lot of those things. And I wonder if either one of you want to speak a little bit to the moral implications of the institutionalization of AI in our lives, or more specifically, Ulises, what you're saying, generative AI.
Um, if I could jump in, I was actually texting with a friend about this today. Um, when I think like Ulysses mentioned, this crisis of cheating, right? I think is a is a weird way to think about academic integrity. And, I'm not sure actually the origins of that. I'd be curious again, like, I'm not a scholar of education per se. So I'm curious about like the origins of the term academic integrity, how ideas about what it means to have integrity and rigor as a researcher, as a scholar have changed over the years, or what the interpretation of that historically has been. Because one of the things that I wonder about is like, what does upholding integrity today as a researcher mean? And this is maybe a specific circumstance, but I think about this a lot as as I watch junior colleagues move through the process of tenure. Uh, does it mean succumbing to the pressure to publish constantly, even if you're not really producing new knowledge? Like, as the metrics start to supersede the actual generation of knowledge, does academic integrity also pertain to a willingness to say, hey, hold on, guys, like maybe I don't need to like increase my H index or whatever. I need to sit for a year and like think about this thing in a kind of depth that I'm not able to when I'm having to, constantly put out papers in journals with particular impact factors or whatever the thing is, right? It's like, it's whatever. I talk to my students about this with grades, Goodhart's law that says whenever something becomes a measure, it stops measuring or it stops being like a good measure. Or when something becomes a goal, I don't know, whatever. You guys know what Goodhart's law is. I can't remember how to phrase it, but like, I think about like, when the metric becomes the goal as opposed to the generation of a new knowledge, how does that shape what we're doing? And does academic integrity entail a refusal to participate in some of those systems?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ruben, because you said that you have never intentionally used AI, which I think more and more of us hope and wish we could be on that camp. But the other part of your question, of course, is, what about the people who cannot avoid being used by AI? And I think, there's some very important work, including by Virginia Eubanks and others who basically, have demonstrated that if you live below the poverty line in this country, AI is already dictating many aspects of your life. So it's not like you have a choice. It's not like you can decide to use or not use AI. And of course, again, we go back to this distinction between machine learning and AI and Gen AI. But here specifically, we're talking about the use of AI to determine, what kind of social services you can access, what kind of like financial opportunities, educational opportunities you can access. So, AI is already being used as a weapon, as a tool to keep certain people, poor people, basically, out of certain opportunities or control them or surveil them so that we know how to distribute whatever resources are available. So here, I think we get into this concept that I do talk a lot about in my work with Nick Coldry about data colonialism, because we do see what's happening not just as a new form of surveillance, not just as a new form of capitalism, but basically as a new form of colonialism or a continuation, let's say, not even a new form, a continuation of the same kind of colonial trends that we have been seeing. Instead of appropriating land, what we call data colonialism appropriates life, human life, through this medium of data. And so, of course, we've written a couple of books on this topic, and you're welcome to go and read more and learn more. But basically, that's the main issue here, that our data is being collected every day through every transaction that we conduct with a digital device. And again, we're not critiquing the use of that data for medical purposes. We're basically critiquing the use of that data to generate profit because that's how it's being used. It's a colonial enterprise where basically the extraction of resources is meant to generate wealth for an elite. And unfortunately, we're seeing it right now unfolding as Doge or whatever Elon Musk's Department of Government efficiency is called. There's a data grab going on right now. Doge is acquiring data from 15 government agencies that we know of and putting all of that data in the hands of a private individual who thinks he is beyond the law. So all of this data, as they say, data is the new oil. Data is a very valuable resource. If you think about cross-referencing government data with data from corporations, you basically have a means not just of thinking of citizens as consumers, which neoliberalism did, but of thinking of citizens as subjects. And if you want to think about how that plays out, we only need to look at what's happening with the Uyghur in China, for instance. An example of what happens when you take data about a specific population to basically, for the purpose of social control.
100%. You mentioned like talking to your students about, um, I have nothing to hide, right? And I'm not doing anything bad. Uh, I've had the same experience in my classes. I talk to students about that at some length, and one of my favorite references when I talk to them about that is an article by Daniel Solovey in the Georgetown Law Review, or no, San Diego Law Review, from 2008 called "I Have Nothing to Hide and Other Misunderstandings of Privacy." And he begins that article by talking about Kafka's Story of the Trial. And he says that neither 1984 nor Brave New World nor any of the other sort of canonical novels or pieces of fiction about the future actually are good analogs for what we're experiencing, but instead the trial is maybe the best analog for what we're experiencing because it's a guy who, gets arrested for a crime. He doesn't know what he's done. He doesn't know what the evidence is against him. And basically, when we are subject to, predictive analytics that synthesize data and make inferences about us relative to other people to whom we have been determined to be similar to, right, by some sort of, algorithmic system that is, again, opaque and impossible to interrogate because it's private, it's got intellectual property around it. Like, we have no idea why certain life chances are being opened or closed to us. And you're right that is by far disproportionately applied to low income folks and people of color, right? And people in the global south, right? That's absolutely true. When it comes to recidivism software, when it comes to, sentencing algorithms, Compass and whatever else, 100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yes, big data has certainly contributed to the intensification of surveillance in our society. And it is worsened now that we have a society that is trending toward dictatorial power. So in a certain way, data have become the basis of power if you have enough resources today in our society. But I want to turn our attention a little bit to the bias that you talked about, that you raised. I think it was racism that one of you referenced, but there's obviously a lot more. And how does that, how can that be corrected in the systems of generative AI, or how is it? Why is it produced that way? Is it just the people who construct it? What's the dynamic there?
Yeah. Well, it depends who you ask in terms of, can it be corrected? I mean, I think big tech would like us to think that yes, it can be. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, and then the model will be perfect. But when I talk to my students about these things, we discussed that obviously this has been going on for a while. So whenever you have a system that works with data that has been extracted from a society that is not perfect, a society that is racist and sexist, obviously those biases are going to be replicated in the technological systems that you produce. And there are some great examples, well, research examples of all of this. One area, for instance, is predictive policing, right? All of the systems that police departments use to try to predict crime or when looking at an individual, sort of make an assessment of how likely they are to commit a serious offense in the future. ProPublica did a very interesting study of this and found that, yes, lo and behold, that system was racially biased. So that even if you look at two people, a black person and a white person, um, the black person is being flagged by the system as more likely to commit an offense in the future, even though if you look at the actual records, if you look at the actual histories, there's a higher probability that the white person with a larger criminal record is going to do that. So that's what we mean by some of these biases inserting themselves into the technologies that we use. Um, it's also true that a lot of these technologies, because they produce lots of hallucinations, because they have a lot of inherent biases, require a lot of hand holding and human intervention. So, the artificial is also kind of like a myth, the artificial in artificial intelligence, because when we uh, interact with a system, we think, oh, there's this great machine behind the scenes, interacting with me. In a lot of cases, it's a machine being guided by a human, with a human monitor, making sure it doesn't go off the rails, making sure it doesn't do anything stupid, it doesn't say anything criminal or offensive. And guess what? A lot of those humans are underpaid people in the global south, armies and armies of them who are making sure that these technologies that are supposedly safe but are not, at least can sort of give the pretense, the illusion that they are in fact safe. So, again, we go back to this notion of a very colonial worldview where is this technologies it's through the efforts, the resources, and the labor of people from the global south who are being underpaid to do all of these things that make the system sort of livable when in fact it's just on the verge of collapsing.
Thank you. Apparently, the notion of ecological fallacy has not been introduced into AI or the engineers that design it. But Zach, did you also want to speak to that?
Oh, I mean, I just wanted to, support what Lucius was saying about the application of a colonial worldview in ways that are historically coherent with things that have happened before. Like this, like a lot of this stuff, like Ulysses was saying, is not new. And it reminds me too of um, the work of like someone like James Ferguson in the Anti-Politics Machine, when we think about like the kinds of aspirations that get mapped onto populations in the global south to what the world should look like emerge from a Western view that has benefited from the very exploitation of those people's labor, right? And so it ends up creating this cycle where somehow the the Silicon Valley promotional apparatus manages to convince so many of us. And again, like I think I I hesitate to say like convince us, right? Because it reminds me of like the Stuart Hall thing I mentioned, which is like it's not like there's a false consciousness that you can just sort of pull back the curtain and like, aha, there it is, and we can like fix the world, Like he knew that. And so, the pressures under which folks who are subject to the very colonial institutions that are producing the AI, that we're dealing with, um, the pressures that neoliberalism and that intersection with colonialism puts on people in the global south also seems to possibly be AI seems to be a salve for that wound, right? Even though it's going to end up reinforcing it. And it's also not those people's fault that they see it as such, right? So it's like, it's complicated and it's enormously frustrating to to like have to kind of like think through all these things and say like, okay, well, what's the next move? What do we do? How do we, and then what is our scope of influence? How do we talk to our students about this kind of stuff and say like, hey, you know, this is an issue without sounding crazy? Because I feel like sometimes I walk into class and I sound like a crazy person.
We're all crazy. Frank, can we invite you to make some comments as well here?
Well, I've really enjoyed this, really very, very perceptive. For those who would ask the question, well, wait a minute, well, why are we having a forum on AI in a initiative that's about neoliberalism? Well, this is the evolution, continuing evolution of neoliberalism, because we worship at the altar of efficiency and productivity, which is one of the fundamental aspects of the way that neoliberalism has evolved. And I was thinking as you were all speaking, and Ruben talked about the moral society. Do we have parents who are sitting down with Johnny and Jill and saying, now to be a good person, you have to be efficient and you must be productive? But what we do is we think about the moral society in terms of there is a certain way of right living. This is the way you have to live. And those people who live a different lifestyle, that's wrong. Well, that's not what we're talking about here when we're talking about a moral society, which includes asking questions, not just what is a moral society in terms of an assertion, but what is a moral society with a question mark. And, we're living this in Washington, as Ulysses mentioned, with Doge. We just, if it's about efficiency, it must automatically be good. So if anything can help you be more efficient, and so you see the response, we must we must protect Elon Musk. Well, the alternative is that we need to protect ourselves from Elon Musk because of his focus on efficiency. So I think that's really important. And your opening presentation, Ulysses, I think gets to that core of a moral society, for me at least, when the institution, again, institution, not an individual, ethical use of AI, a respectful use of AI that is respectful of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is concerned about not just plagiarism, but deceptive plagiarism, concerned about stealing other people's work, copyright violations, and concern about the unintended consequences, not necessarily done explicitly, but the subtle racism, and also the reduction, and this again relates to one of the issues we're dealing with generally. There is clearly, I live in Florida during the winter, there is clearly an effort here administratively by the state government to basically bury critical thinking skills. Critical thinking is dangerous because if people can deconstruct, if they can analyze, if they can say, wait a minute here, as we're doing today, they may not be complicit. In fact, likely they're going to be on the street corner at some time soon protesting against our attempt to be efficient and productive. And so this has very much to do with neoliberalism. And what's amazing about all of this is that we're clearly not having enough conversations like this because otherwise we wouldn't be seeing so much evidence in the broader society at the highest levels.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments, Frank. And, to bring it back to the university, which is the other topic of this discussion, I do hope you get a chance to look at a new book that's just come out called Smart University, Student Surveillance in the Digital Age by Lindsay Weinberg, and maybe have her in one of these forums because she really does an excellent job of tracking all the steps, all the points at which universities surveil students in this modern digital age. And it starts with recruitment, right? It starts with when potential students visit our colleges' websites and how we start collecting data from them, which, granted, that's how the world works today. But one of the issues she's bringing up is that, well, how does that data down the road uh, allow universities to make certain decisions about the kind of students a person, an individual is? So all of that data that's collected right during the recruitment process may end up influencing financial aid decisions, program selection decisions, replicating some of the biases that we're talking about. From recruitment, of course, once students arrive to campus, then it's free for all data collection all the time through the LMSs, the learning management systems that we use, through the what are they called, like the advisor systems that we use, because again, faculty are overwhelmed. Here's a tool that will let you raise an academic flag if you're concerned about this student.
And
Now,
all
of
of those
course,
have
those
AI baked into them too, right?
they do. And
Yeah.
furthermore, they are all third-party systems, which again, we click the little box that says, I agree for my data to be collected. Who knows what these corporations are doing with that data? And then there's all of the student surveillance through CCTV, mental health. Lindsay Weinberg identifies as another big issue. Again, students are stressed. Let's give them a chatbot so that they can talk to a chatbot and get therapy, and
And
on
it's
and
like in the
on.
service of efficiency. Like it's
Exactly.
like operating, when the dominant model becomes computationally driven optimization of self and institution, we end up mimicking the very things that are oppressing us, right? The very things that are producing that anxiety that the students are experiencing in the first place, or the very things that are making us need to take more of their tuition dollars, you know? It's like, it's so crazy.
It is. We need to have that conversation about all of that extractivism.
One of the things that I usually say when asked about education is that it helps the student develop on a personal level, that they develop technical skills and they expand their stock of knowledge. One of the things that I subsume with the personal is civic engagement or civic learning. And the notion of democracy has been brought up a couple of times here. How can generative AI help us what's the relationship, first of all, between generative AI and democracy? And then how can we use it to promote student civic engagement and to promote civic education?
I mean, I
Zach,
don't
I'm going to
know.
let you answer that first.
Do you know Dan McQuillan's book about fascist AI? Like, my sense is, and I don't necessarily, we don't really have the time to like talk about the underpinnings of this, but AI, generative AI in particular, we're not, again, not talking about sort of all sophisticated computing. I think like, just like Ulysses said, like AI tends to get lumped in with all sorts of other stuff, and we just sort of say AI. But generative AI in particular is a technology that primarily caters to fascism. It caters to the impulse of centralizing power and authority, and it caters to the confusion of the population in ways that are germane to the usurpation of power, usurpation, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so I think having conversations about how AI, in generative AI in particular, how it works, what it means for society, the kinds of uh, deleterious impacts that it has both at a social, personal, and environmental levels, I think can actually engender democratic participation, small d democratic, right? In terms of just like being an active member of society in a way that you're aware of asymmetries of power and privilege, is like a good first step. I don't know. Ulysses, you wanna there's a great episode about Tech Won't Save Us with Dan McQuillan on there talking about his book.
Yeah, yeah. Big fan of Dan's work. I guess, and since we have about 10 minutes left, I'd like to take your question, Ruben, and sort of, direct it towards the question of what can we do? Because I think, this is an important it should be an important component of our discussions because these things are overwhelming. And when I talk to my students, they get depressed. I get depressed, and so it's important to also sort of think about what we can do. Not necessarily think about solutions in terms of, well, you just need to do these 5 things, because I think that's what people want. We all wish there were 5 things we could do and solve all of these problems. But if we're dealing with problems that are as old as colonialism, we're not going to undo history, a 500-year-old history, in a couple of quick, easy fixes. At the same time, I was just reading a quote by Paul Matic, who basically said capitalism has nowhere to go but to its death. And so that gives us a great opportunity. This is a very self-destructive system. And one thing we can do is just watch it all burn down, perhaps take us with it as it does. So, but hopefully we can be a little bit more active, proactive, and have more room for intervening in this system. But we do have to keep in mind that this system is unsustainable. It results in death and destruction and environmental degradation. So, we need to intervene. It gives us a great space to intervene because people don't want death. In our work, Nick and I sort of think about how activists in Latin America have approached this problem. There are people who have decades, if not centuries, of a history of resistance. And what they tell us is that you have to act at 3 simultaneous levels. You have to act within the system, you have to act against the system, and you have to act beyond the system. And just doing one of those 3 levels is not going to be enough. So acting within the system means some of the things we're discussing right now, trying to shape our universities' policies on how AI should be done, should be integrated, try to influence how our governments, the kinds of policies that our governments pass, or the kind of policies that our workplaces implement. So working within the system is very important. We should not give up, and because Musk and Trump are going crazy, say, democracy is dead, and I'm just going to stop voting and stop caring. At the same time, working within the system might not be enough, so we also have to work against it. All forms of protests are very important, and there are so many examples from across the world. Sometimes we don't get to hear it in mainstream media because, again, more and more we only get to hear certain kinds of narratives, but the information is there, and we should learn from past and present movements of decolonization. And at the end of the day, we also have to work within, we also have to imagine what it would look like to be beyond the system. So this is where imagination plays such a critical role. And imagination has always been the most important weapon of anti-colonization, because when colonialism couldn't be resisted with the body, it could be resisted with the mind. And so again, we can learn a lot from these movements and how they have imagined responses to colonialism. And we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to decolonize space. We're going to have to decolonize time. We're going to have to decolonize love, because more and more of our young people are falling in love with chatbots. And then there's already cases of people committing suicide. Even Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, is concerned about that. So I think that's where imagination is going to be crucial for sort of thinking about how to resist.
Thank you very much. Zach, you want to make some?
That was so well put. I want to just let that be. I think we have a lot to learn, and I certainly myself have a lot to learn from folks in the global south, put that in air quotes. Because I think, folks who were resisting oil companies coming in, folks who were resisting exploitation of their water resources. I think about people in Colombia and Ecuador. I think from those movements we have a lot to learn. Indigenous autonomous communities, the Zapatistas perhaps as well. Certainly references that I draw inspiration from, but yeah, I think We have a lot of, I think you're right. Like we need to keep doing stuff, whatever that looks like. And it's very hard right now. I think we're at a time when we're seeing the early stages of some pretty scary things. And so it's hard to wake up in the morning and be like, okay, I'm gonna do the next, I don't know, my daughter loves Frozen, and so there's this mantra in Frozen 2, the next right thing. And whatever that next right thing is, like it's hard to get up in the morning and do it. So, gotta just remember that there are people like us out there. I'm certainly drawing inspiration from this conversation, feeling, Ulysses saying some of this stuff. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, I can do it.
Thank you. Frank, can I invite you to make some comments, closing comments?
Well, this has just absolutely been wonderful. And, I can't wait for this to be in final form so I can watch it all over again. And I encourage those who are watching to share it with their colleagues because it's the kind of discourse on a matter that is not getting the attention that it deserves, particularly in the broader public domain, and it's just that important. So, thank both of you. Thank you, Ruben, for doing another excellent job at facilitating and introducing the subject.
Thank you, Frank. I was at an event at the Capitol here in Michigan yesterday, and I walked past one of the statues there. These Capitol grounds, they always have these statues of our great leaders. And I stopped to see one of them. It was, I forget the name of the governor, but he is known as the war governor, and he made some final comments in 1865. So apparently he was the war governor during the Civil War, which, is a very apt kind of period for us. And as I read the quote, what is listed as his last quotation or quote or statement, I'm going to paraphrase it. He said something like, those of us who live in a democratic republic appreciate the beneficence and the freedom afforded by our institutions, but it also requires that we have the courage to protect them. And so I think that's what a war governor can tell us for those of us living during our time. Uh, I also want to remind everyone, any of our viewers and also our guests today, that on February 26th at 11 o'clock again, we have two very, very engaging speakers, Scott Peters and Bethany Latique, who will be speaking on authoritarianism and higher education in America's political crisis. So please, I'll send out this flyer here shortly, and we'll get started on preparing for the next Future You Forum. I want to thank both of our excellent presenters for taking the time to join us today to share their wisdom and their knowledge with our viewers and those who are interested in the topic, and I welcome you back again sometime soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing the good work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.